Okay, so good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Kayla Rogers, and I'm the program supervisor for the Women's Fund. For those of you who are not familiar with our organization, we are a nonprofit located in Houston, and our mission is to provide women and girls with the tools they need to be advocates for their health. We do this through focused seminars like today's presentation, as well as curriculum-based classes and publications. I will be sending out a follow-up email after this presentation today with links to our website and our publications if you're interested in learning a little bit more about the Women's Fund. So today we are very excited to have Alyssa Bauer here with us. I'm going to introduce her briefly and then turn the floor over. Before I do that, I do want to note that our presentation is going to be a little bit shorter today. We're going to try to wrap it up around 12:45. So I highly encourage that if you have questions throughout the presentation to add them into the chat. That way, when we get to Q&A, we have some questions loaded there already. And also, if you could please keep yourself muted throughout the presentation just to limit any distractions. Okay. So Alyssa is a licensed professional counselor, supervisor, and the program manager of the Pathfinder program at the Menninger Clinic, a community integration program for emerging adults. Alyssa has over 11 years of experience counseling adults and emerging adults in individual, group, and family settings. She specializes in trauma-informed and cognitive-based therapeutic modalities and is trained in EMDR. Alyssa has experience working with clients with personality disorders, mood disorders, chemical dependency issues, and PTSD. She is passionate about helping clients achieve self-sufficiency and self-worth in a collaborative person approach. She received her bachelor's degree in psychology from the University of Texas at Austin and her master's degree in adult community counseling from University of North Texas with a marriage and family subspecialty. So thank you so much for joining us today, and I'm going to go ahead and turn it over.
Thank you. I'm really excited to be here because I think the mission that the Women's Fund supports is very important and timely to call and ask me to speak about mental health considerations post-COVID during Mental Health Awareness Month. So I'm excited to talk about this today. And I also want this to be interactive. So if you guys have questions or comments or feedback during the presentation, feel free to jump in and ask. So coming back from COVID restrictions, mental health considerations, and resilience, this is sort of an umbrella term because I know we haven't come back from COVID, but I do think we're in a reintegration phase of the pandemic where we're thinking about how did the past 2 years impact us and what did it leave us with as far as our mental health and what do we need to think about as far as resilience moving forward into future stages of a pandemic, which are unknown. So I wanted to talk about a couple things today. First, just a brief overview of 2 and some years of COVID that left us uncertain and stressed. Second, noticing symptoms of depression and anxiety. So I want to talk a little bit about what that looks like and how you might notice symptoms if it happens to you. Moving forward to a reintegration stage of the pandemic, and then finally coping skills and resilience. So this won't come as a surprise to anyone, but it's been an uncertain 2 years and we all thrive on routine and predictability, and COVID took that away from us. There are a lot of different stages of the pandemic and it felt very tumultuous at times. A couple things that were really impactful: mask wearing. There were social emotional development considerations for that, especially for kiddos, and hearing considerations for all of us, socializing. Decreased socialization with social distancing led to increased isolation. So we were apart from a lot of our support systems. Stay-at-home orders really impacted a lot of women. It impacted our jobs, it impacted school, and working parents sometimes were doing double duty, even working from home, school at home, and a lot of people were very, very overloaded with new responsibilities that they had to adapt to. And then, of course, this 24/7 news cycle all about the virus, feeling inundated with virus talk, uncertainty of safety, what to believe and when. And of course, anybody you would go around had an opinion about something. And so we had this stress response running in overdrive for a long, long time, which is important to note and validate. This was data from early pandemic days, but the stay-at-home orders were pretty impactful, especially for mental health symptoms. They were noticing a lot of connection between isolation and loneliness with budding mental health symptoms. And they noticed it was especially negative on adolescents and older adults. But I think we can all agree it really impacted everybody, all social groups. So what that means for us now is we might have some residual anxiety coming into this integration phase. And there was a great blog actually on the Menninger Mind Matters blog on Psychology Today. I don't know if you guys have checked that out, but about different anxieties and automatic anxious thoughts that have been coming up as we face the reintegration stage. So a few that are common, I research COVID excessively. I only feel safe if I continue to isolate. I'm not sure how to approach that. I fear in-person environments. I'm continually canceling plans because of COVID. I'm having trouble trusting news and doctors. I hear too many varied messages. I'm having trouble distinguishing what symptoms are chronic and what symptoms are COVID, especially when we think about burnout, fatigue, exhaustion. And I feel disconnected from what I used to do and who I used to do them with, right? You guys are just chatting about 2 years later, do I know how to use this thing? Who are my social supports? I have to re-engage with so many things, and that feels really overwhelming. In this, I was wondering if anybody else had some anxious thoughts that pop up when they think about reintegration in COVID that I didn't mention here. Anything that comes up for you?
Yeah, I feel like I have a lot more anxiety just doing things that were normal before, like even just going into the grocery store. And once things started lightening up, it was like, okay, should I be wearing my mask? Should I not be wearing it? There's a lot of people who aren't, but I don't know if they're vaccinated. And so it's like, yeah, a lot of anxiety that I didn't really have around doing normal things before. Now, like I get stressed when I have to go to the grocery store, but I have to go.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
And I have I talked to my goddaughter and she's like, I have social anxiety just getting on the bus.
Yes.
I'm thinking that all the kids are looking at me or they're judging me because I haven't been at school in so long,
Yeah, everything feels different, even if we were doing them before. Crowds is another thing that maybe you didn't mind crowds before. I know for me, crowds feel a little bit more startling now. Definitely. So anxiety's function is adaptable in general, right? Anxiety is something that we have that tries to prepare us for something impactful or something to keep ourselves safe in. There's obviously a level of anxiety where it hinders functioning and keeps us away from our goals and needs and values. But, part of the reason why we're having reentry anxiety is because some of the safeguards that we've come to know are starting to lift, right? So stay-at-home protection is gone. Crowds might scare a little bit more than before. Our energy levels have changed. Our routine was different. Maybe we were sleeping different hours because we were doing work from home all the time. And now we're dealing with a commute again, or getting ready in the morning, getting our kids ready in the morning, packing lunches again. We also weren't running our lives as tight and busy as we were probably pre-COVID, and now we might be doing that again. There can be a lot of feelings of hopelessness and loss of control around potential new variants. Again, with the news cycle, we don't know what we don't know until we know it, and that can leave us feeling powerless and stressed that, should I get used to this normalcy? Can I enjoy this normalcy? Is something coming around the corner? Kind of like you were saying, Kayla, uncertainty of your own personal risk tolerance. Like, what do I need to do to make myself feel safe? That might change depending on the day or depending on what Harris County tells us, what the Med Center tells us. And then education about the virus can be useful, but it can be really overstimulating for our stress response. And so sometimes we notice if we're looking at the news cycle until late at night, it's causing this anticipation anxiety to really ramp up and we're feeling extra stressed. So it makes sense and it can be taxing on our bodies. So I wanted to pivot a little bit to talk a little bit about anxiety and depression, what symptoms lead to diagnosing it. It can be really hard to pinpoint what's situational and what's ongoing and might need a closer look. So I just wanted to talk about what to look for. Typically, we're looking for symptoms more often than not for at least 6 months or more before we think about diagnosing an anxiety disorder or major depression, something like that. And again, a lot of our anxiety is adaptive and makes sense, but too much anxiety can sometimes cause us to withdraw or disconnect or feel overwhelmed or shut down. So if we're getting away from our values instead of going towards our values, sometimes we can tell that anxiety is starting to hinder, if that makes sense. So anxiety disorder could encompass things like panic attacks, excessive worrying, irritability, difficulty concentrating, chronic fatigue, muscle tension, excessive sweating, rapid heartbeat, extreme fear of social contact. So that could kind of dovetail into social anxiety or social phobia. Somatic responses, so GI distress, stomach aches. We see a lot of that at work. I've been having these physical symptoms for a long time. I've got the specialist, no one seems to know what it is. Sometimes it's connected to anxiety, and headaches and dizziness. So again, a lot of times we have these symptoms throughout our day and it's not either prevalent or disturbing. Think about having a cluster of symptoms for a long stretch of time when we think about an anxiety disorder. Depression too can be situational, right? Things can go on in our lives, such as grief or acute trauma, things like that, that cause us to feel situationally depressed. But to diagnose depression, we're looking for these signs and symptoms. Depressed moods, so the feeling of emptiness, sad, hopeless, tearfulness, and loss of interest or pleasure in all or most activities of your day. To diagnose, we need one of those two to be present in combination with some of these other symptoms. So some of the other symptoms include weight changes or appetite changes, increase or decrease, insomnia, which is trouble sleeping, or hypersomnia, oversleeping, psychomotor agitation, so that's typically unwanted movements in our body, fatigue or energy loss, feelings of worthlessness or excessive guilt that's hard to quiet, loss of concentration, or recurrent thoughts of death or recurrent suicidal ideation.
Yeah. For the psychomotor, is that like pacing and twitching? Like, can it be like, is it both things? You know what I mean? Like if you're pacing all the time or if your eye is twitching, you know?
Yeah.
Is that what that means?
Twitching sometimes, pacing, I think a bit more of anxiety because I think we're trying to burn some energy of that restlessness and agitation.
Okay.
So sometimes it's just unwanted movements of different limbs.
Okay.
And then again, all of us might have some of these responses short term, but just thinking about if it's a reaction or if it's chronic, is it happening more often than not for at least 6 months? Are your best coping skills not moving the needle? And is your level of burnout becoming harder to bounce back from? So these are a couple of questions that I find helpful to think about. When is it starting to become something that's ongoing? There was a great article about the languishing phenomenon, just that we've all been weathering way more than usual for a long period of time. And so for a lot of us, our coping skills weren't working in the way they typically were. We either didn't have access to all of our coping skills that we loved so much, or they just weren't doing the trick, right? We could take a bath and you're still feeling really on edge. So thinking about, are the typical things I do not moving the needle for me? Any questions on depression or anxiety? So next I wanted to pivot to resilience and coping skills. And hopefully you guys can jump in as well with what helps for you, because it's by no means an exhaustive list of different things you can do. But I really like to focus on resilience because I feel like we don't give ourselves enough credit for everything we've done to cope. And even if you're not proud of every single way you've coped, that's okay, right? Sometimes that coping skill got us to where we are today. So resilience, I looked at the definition earlier, just the Oxford definition, and I really liked it. It was the capacity to recover from difficulties and or toughness. And I really liked the term toughness because it reminded us that we're really strong with how much we've weathered. And if you've ever worked with me professionally, you know that I jabber a lot about self-compassion. I think that's one of the biggest, most helpful coping skills for resilience and bouncing back from hardship. And there's some great research by a woman named Kristen Neff. She created selfcompassion.org, and there's great quizzes and journal entries and information about self-compassion. And so I use her material a lot for groups I do and in individual sessions because it's so helpful. And I never really thought about it in the way that she phrases it. So she says that self-compassion is being kind, validating, and understanding towards oneself the way we are towards others. And many of us know that in a relationship or in a friendship, or even with our kids or our own parents, validation and empathy can really diffuse the strength of our emotion, right? It really can cause that to regulate a little bit more. You feel safer and you feel more at ease. So it works internally too. If we can validate and acknowledge and understand our struggles and ourselves, we can diffuse our own emotion too, because we spend a lot of time in the critic voice, or fighting pain, or judging pain, comparing pain. And so this is a different lens to look at it. And Kristen Neff goes as far as to help you script how to talk to yourself, which I think is really useful. But she says it comes down to 3 components. One is self-kindness, which I just touched on a little bit, warmth and understanding towards our pain, not ignoring it or compartmentalizing it all the time, and not critiquing it for it being a struggle. Second, she talks about common humanity, right? Just that it's part of the human experience to suffer. We all suffer, we all experience pain. We're not inadequate because we experience pain, and we're also not alone in the pain. So that's not to get you to compare pain with others, but to unify us all that we all go through some level of pain and struggle. And then she really promotes mindfulness, which is observing our negative thoughts and emotions so that they're in our awareness, right? We're just aware of what's happening. And she gives a reminder that thoughts are just thoughts. And just a reminder, you are resilient. Look at what you've been through and look at what you've conquered already. And I will say self-compassion, it's hard to start and it's hard to keep up with. We could all use a little self-compassion scripting for sure. I also wanted to talk about radical acceptance. This is another coping skill. Does someone have a question?
I think they just forgot.
Okay. So radical acceptance is another distress tolerance tool, and it comes from dialectical behavioral therapy, DBT for short. This was a therapy that was created by Marsha Linehan, and it's really, really useful for emotion regulation and interpersonal effectiveness. And she talks a lot about radical acceptance. So radical acceptance can feel controversial at a base level, but it's actually really helpful when we dive into it a little bit more. It's not just wholesale accepting whatever happens to you. It's a bit more complex than that. So our goal is to accept situations that are outside our control without judging them, which reduces suffering caused by that. So she says pain does not mean we have to continue suffering. We can have pain without continued suffering. And acceptance also does not mean we endorse a situation. We still don't have to like the facts, even if we're working with radical acceptance, which applies to COVID, right? I wish none of this had happened. I still don't like the facts. And I don't necessarily need to suffer through it. So it turns our mind and body towards accepting we can't change these present facts. It is what it is. And we're not giving up, we're not giving in, but we're trying to stop those stuck thoughts that say it's not fair, why me? And she urges you to ask yourself the question, what would change if I accepted instead of fought the reality? While allowing disappointment, sadness, and grief to be there. I was trying to get this a little bit bigger. This was in somebody's blog, but it's quoting Marsha Linehan. This is different behaviors that promote radical acceptance, such as observing your brain trying to fight, noticing the reasons why your brain can't radically accept. There's also a list of behaviors. What would I do differently if I started to accept my reality? What would be different? You know, attend to your body's reaction, allow your disappointment to be there, acknowledge what's happening for you, and even pro-con what acceptance might mean. So there's some interesting stuff there. More coping skills. And again, these are just what I've seen work well. Some of this is from positive psychology research, and some of it's what really works in my practice for both myself and the clients I work with. So first and foremost, I definitely recommend, if you related to anything I'm saying, to see a therapist. A lot of times talk therapy can help a lot with symptoms of depression and anxiety. And a psychiatrist is a medical doctor who works on medication management for any symptoms if it feels like talk therapy is not moving the needle on the severity of our symptoms. So they work well hand in hand. They work well separately. But we've been shouldering a lot more than usual. And sometimes we're noticing that it's just overwhelming our mind. Maybe we're staying up later than we normally do, ruminating or rehearsing things, or we wake up feeling antsy or overwhelmed or jumpy. Things like that are really useful to bring to therapy. Helpful to get support and feedback. And then asking the hard questions about your mental health symptoms to these providers, right? Part of that's the validating and acknowledging this has been going on for me. This is what's been hard. Other helpful things, moving your body can be really useful. Of course, you know, we were pretty sedentary in COVID sometimes, being so confined to our homes, our computers, and it can be useful to get some air, move your body. Meditation and mindfulness is a really useful tool. I don't know about you guys, but my brain's not going to naturally slow down. I have to teach it, train it, rinse, repeat. And I usually need someone talking to me to do that. So I have to use the apps if I'm really going to do this right. But meditation, you can do it silently, you can do it with an app, but it's basically us teaching our brain to slow down and break up that stress response. And then mindfulness is a little bit different. That's when we're more present and observing of what's going on in the here and now. And it's useful to do this, especially in joyful things, right? A moment with a family member, being outside, having a meal we really enjoy, kind of slowing ourselves down and being in the moment mindfully. Monitoring your media consumption. Again, the nonstop stressful information keeps that stress response, cortisol flowing in our body over and over again. I always have to grab the phone away from my husband. Sometimes he'll refresh Twitter again. I'll say there can't be anything new on there that we don't already know from today. We have to put this down and take a break. Gratitude practice. I'm a big proponent of a gratitude practice. So the research did show if you do 3 gratitudes every night for 21 days, it trains your brain to be more optimistic. And I found this to be super helpful. It's really great when we can be specific with our gratitudes. It's really great when we can point them inwards sometimes, even, you know, thanking our body for its resilience or thanking it for working today. It's also helpful to vary these periodically when we're going over them in our mind. More coping skills, re-engaging with friends and family face-to-face. This is super important. A lot of us got Zoom fatigue. And we can do this in ways that feel comfortable, right? We can do this outside. We can do this on a porch. We can do this however feels right, masked even. At least it's face-to-face contact and connection. We really do need that for our resilience. Getting creative and using our hands at work. A lot of the times when we're trying to focus on the future, we create vision boards to facilitate hope. You know, what do we want in our futures? What are our next steps? Scheduling things to look forward to is really important, even if it's just an easy road trip to the beach, gather with family, go strawberry picking, you name it, whatever you look forward to. It's important to have stuff like that on the horizon. Caretakers, COVID was tough on anyone caretaking, children, parents, or maybe you're in the helping profession. It's really important to schedule an extended break from duties and get some coverage so you can take that break. Burnout is really, really high right now. I always love using good humor. I think that's really important. It keeps us connected and keeps levity in our life. And positive psychology also really promotes acts of service and kindness. So there's a ton of ways to volunteer right now, but also it can be as easy as sending a text or an email about how someone impacted you and making their day. That gives us a boost and helps us cope. Don't forget the basics. I know this seems obvious, but it's super important, especially in a high stress time, because resilience can hinge on maintaining our basics. So don't neglect adequate sleep, adequate nutrition, adequate hydration, and medication. That definitely helps boost us and scaffolds us to function better. And that's all I have, but I was wondering about your coping skills and what really helps you, especially thinking about the time period we've been in. What's helped you cope?
For me, it's going on long walks.
Long walks, yeah. Yeah,
I think increasing my physical activity.
yeah.
So during the pandemic, I actually joined a gym, which sounds kind of crazy because you probably don't want to be around, you know, we weren't trying to be around people. But it was once things opened back up, and it really helped to be moving my body and kind of getting out some of all that pent up energy that built up sitting all day long.
And changing the four walls around you.
Yeah, a change of scenery
Yes.
for sure.
I felt really happy when I started reconnecting with folks and just exchanging or sharing experiences. So I no longer felt like I was the only one observing certain things or feeling a certain way,
Yeah.
but other people were also.
Felt so lonely there in our heads, you know, by ourselves. Absolutely.
Yeah, for me, it was kind of getting back into reading, running away from technology and
Yes.
just having that me time and just, I guess, dozing off and what the story was saying. Just, yeah, just spending time by myself.
Gives our brain something else to think about, right? It's such a helpful distract tool. Yeah.
A new one that I'm doing now is nesting. So so actually today I'm gonna go and put curtains up, and I changed my shower curtain. So it's like little things that I'm doing, like I have a list of
Yeah.
things that I'm doing that are changing my environment in the house as well. Cause you know, like you're looking at the walls all the time and you're like, but I need to change this or need to do that. But I've just been doing it a little bit at a time. But it's making a huge difference. And the next one that goes along with that is it's 22 and 22. And so I give away 22 things, or I trash 22 things. Like it's, does that make sense? Like,
Yes, declutter.
it's like declutter. So like I might donate it, I might barter it, I might do something, but it's like try to do 22 things, 22 days out of the month, which like, it sounds like I have a whole bunch of stuff, but I don't like, it's like, you're amazed at like, just like the stuff in your junk drawer, like.
Oh, yes.
You know what I mean? Like, it was simple things like that. Like, it's like, oh, I need to, you know, enclose, like, the closet is too full. I need to
Yeah.
I need to donate that stuff away. And so it just made it like a game, like, oh, can I give 20 things away? But it's been working for me.
Also like
I would
changing
keep
the
it
tone of
organized.
your space, right? Because if it was looking all one way during a really hard time, sometimes we need to refresh.
Yeah,
No, I need.
and there's things that remind me of something, and I'm like, I need to get rid of that, I need to purge it.
Yeah.
And there's nothing wrong with it, so I could give it to a friend for their birthday or
Yeah.
something, you know what I mean, like, it doesn't have to be like, you know, me going and buying something, it's like looking at the stuff that's in my house and
Mhm.
saying, like, I need something else with this, or put it in a different spot.
To share your discipline with that. Because I start, but then I talk myself out of it. Think, no, you're gonna need that one day.
Right, I was gonna say it away. I know.
Well, like I said, it was for the volunteer thing, there was this group of people that I was meeting with, and there happened to be 22 women of it, and I was like, oh, so every day I would bring something to them, and like, here's a gift, and like, I said, something that was like picture frames or just, I don't know, so, I mean, and it's like this stuff that you're just like, I don't have this, and I can give it to somebody, and they don't know that it's recycled. You know, because like I said, for me, it was new. I never used it, and I never used it. So it's like, here, you can have it, and they were so appreciative. They're like,
Mutual benefit, yeah.
yeah, and it's at my house.
Oh, okay, we doing the round robin? Okay.
Yes.
For me, I have ADHD, so I have to get stuff out my head, and the only way I can do it is if I write it down.
Yeah.
So I said that, I'm just gonna make goals, long-term goal, medium-term goals, short-term goals. Because the last 2 years has been a major setback, so I'm preparing for a major comeback. So I've got these big old major grandiose goals that I'm going to do, like open up my own business. So now I'm doing research and how to open up a nonprofit and then how to do all this. So I'm staying out my head from being negative, because I hate the negative self-talk I do by keeping myself busy
Yeah.
and saying like the things that I can do, you know, and how can I get it done.
Reconnecting with your purpose is such a boost, right?
Yes.
Especially when we felt disconnected from that.
Yes.
Yeah. That's great. You guys can give me a whole third slide. I love journaling. That's great.
Okay, so if you are with us virtually, if you have any questions at this time, please place them into the chat box. You can also unmute yourself to ask your question if you would prefer to do that. I will go ahead and kick us off with the first question. You mentioned burnout during your presentation. Can you talk a little bit more about what burnout is and then how it impacts our mental health?
For sure. So my understanding of burnout is both psychological, but also physical. So I think there's an emotional component and a physical component, because the stress response impacts both, right? It's a chemical coming from our brain, but it shoots all over our body. And so to me, it means that's been overactive for a long time. So we've been heightened, elevated, hypervigilant in our life for a period of time, and we feel the effects physically and emotionally, right? We're overtired, we're fatigued, like, you know, that feeling at the end of a long week where you just feel numb or overtired. So that's my understanding of burnout. But because this has gone on so long, I think people are feeling it almost next level, right? There's some fatigue with the job we're doing, or some fatigue in parenting, or fatigue in going to school, or I think it's taken a bigger form. But it really does impact our functioning, because once we've experienced extreme burnout, it's kind of hard to bounce back. You know, sometimes we can take a significant break and that helps some, but a lot of times with burnout, we're finding that our everyday coping skills don't work as well as we would hope. It's lingering a little bit more. But we can interrupt that stress response, right? We can refocus our brain and our body, but it does take a little bit of time, I think, to get through the level of burnout we've experienced lately. And maybe it might be time to refocus on different things for some people, right? You know, if you're in the health industry or something like that, and being a caregiver all the time is something that it's feeling really hard right now to bounce back from. Is it a time to pivot and think about what else you're good at? You know, it might be a point in time where in our current life, the way it is, we might not get through the burnout to the extent it's happened. Sometimes we will though.
Interesting because at the beginning of the pandemic, I know some people, especially healthcare workers, I feel like they've been experiencing burnout this whole time. And then for other people, it was an opportunity to kind of slow down the pace of life because you couldn't maybe go into the office. And so you had more time to do things around your home. But then it almost feels like as soon as you returned back to work, everything just picked up so fast. So I liked that you mentioned that because I've thought about that a few times. Like, it's just crazy. It feels different now. Like, it feels like you were saying, like, just a bit more, like it's extra burden.
Yeah, and that's a good point. You know, there were some benefits to the pandemic for some people, you know, more time with your family and the chance to slow down. And then for some people that felt like a luxury to have been granted that because maybe their worksite never shut down, they never went home. Our worksite didn't shut down. So I can relate to both sides, you know, thinking about what it would have been like to slow down and how that would have had some gifts too. And, you know, if there was never a disruption, you might be feeling burnt out at this point.
So another question, you mentioned in some of the coping mechanisms, the having something to look forward to. And so I am one of those people that needs something to look forward to. But I was wondering if practicing gratitude would help me to be more mindful, because I feel like what happens is I get so excited and I build up so much joy around these events or things that I'm looking forward to. And then I have a hard time enjoying them because I just feel sad that they're going by so quickly. So I was like, I wonder if practicing gratitude will help to be a bit more mindful in any situation, but especially in things like that.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. Yeah, I would argue we're all people who need something to look forward to. And that does sometimes motivate us to keep at our daily grind. But I do appreciate feeling like once the event's there, we do need to slow down and be in it. So what can we do in that moment to reduce distractions, observe what's going on, observe the joy, take it in? Because it is sad at the end because we feel like it's over. We may not get that same experience ever again. And like you said, maybe following up with some gratitudes or some journaling to think about what the experience brought you. Like that. Pairing the coping skills.
That was just so sweet. She said, I get so sad because it's so long.
That's true.
So do we have any questions in chat? Any final questions here in the room?
I have a question for you. We talk to adolescents a lot and they always use the word stress and anxiety interchangeably.
Mm-hmm.
So will you break that down? What the difference is between them?
Yeah, for sure. So in my mind, stress is an in the moment response that our body has so we can function under pressure. So if you have a big deadline coming up or a tiger launches at you, right? We've got all these biological responses so that we can adapt in the moment. Our brain turns on, the cortisol gets going, we're reacting. Anxiety is more anticipatory. So we're planning for something hard. What if a tiger jumps out at me? What if Omicron Delta Nu part 2.5 comes back at us, right? So it's anticipating how we might function in a stressor. So that's where it sometimes gets carried away because we start fortune telling or future tripping. There's all these cognitive behavioral therapy words for that, but we over plan or over rehearse when we don't really know what's coming.
Okay, so if you are like me and you walk away from today's presentation and then you have questions, you can always email us at healtheducator@thewomensfund.org and we will work to get answers for those. I will be sending out a survey link. We would really appreciate if you would take a few moments to fill out the survey and let us know what you liked, what you think we can do better. And more specifically, if there are any topics that you're interested in hearing about. And then I should have brought a clicker, but these are our social media handles. So if you're interested in following us, we post there regularly about events and presentations that we have coming up. Our website does have the awareness series registration pages for the remainder of the year. So if you want to go and register for those ahead of time, I definitely encourage you to do so. Then next week, we will be having our second Doc Talk of the year, breaking barriers to youth mental health care. So we're going to be discussing mental health again next week. And I believe that opportunity will be hybrid as well. So you can join virtually or you can join us in person, and that is also up on our website. So Alyssa, thank you so much for
Thanks
this
for having me.
presentation. And thank you all so much for joining us virtually and in the room. And we hope to see you next time. Bye.